The air felt thick with unseen tension as Detective Sarah Reeves pulled up to the abandoned amusement park. Rusted rides loomed in the twilight, their once cheerful colors now faded and ominous. This wasn't her usual beat. Sarah specialized in cybercrime, but a bizarre string of disappearances had brought her to this eerie place on the outskirts of town. As she stepped out of her car, gravel crunching underfoot, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The park had been closed for years, yet something about it felt unnaturally alive. She pulled out her flashlight, its beam cutting through the growing darkness, and began to explore. The case had started 3 months ago with the vanishing of a local teenager. At first, it seemed like a typical runaway situation. But then more people went missing: a banker, a nurse, a retired teacher. The only connection was that each had visited this abandoned park in the days before their disappearance. Sarah moved cautiously past a decrepit carousel, its horses frozen mid-gallop. Her mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. The victims had nothing in common: different ages, backgrounds, lifestyles. What could have drawn them all to this forsaken place? As she approached the old funhouse, Sarah noticed something odd. Unlike the other attractions, its door was slightly ajar. Heart pounding, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The musty smell of decay hit her immediately, along with something else, a faint chemical odor she couldn't quite place. The funhouse was a maze of warped mirrors and narrow corridors. Sarah's flashlight beam bounced off distorted reflections, creating unsettling shadows. She pressed on, driven by a mix of duty and growing unease. At the center of the maze, she found what she was looking for and wished she hadn't. A hidden room, cleverly concealed behind a trick wall. Inside, a makeshift laboratory filled with computer equipment, chemical vats, and something that made Sarah's blood run cold: a wall of photos, each showing one of the missing persons. But these weren't ordinary photos. They seemed to capture moments of terror, faces contorted in fear or pain. Sarah's cybercrime instincts kicked in as she examined the computers. They were state-of-the-art, a stark contrast to the decaying surroundings. As she dug deeper, a horrifying picture began to emerge. Someone was using this place as a base for a series of twisted experiments combining cutting-edge technology with mind-altering drugs to manipulate and control their victims. The sound of footsteps echoing through the funhouse snapped Sarah back to reality. She wasn't alone. Quickly, she copied as much data as she could onto a flash drive and looked for a way out. But the maze seemed to have shifted, pathways rearranging themselves in impossible ways. Sarah's training took over as she navigated the changing labyrinth. Her pursuer was getting closer, their breathing audible now. She rounded a corner and found herself face to face with a mirror. For a split second, she saw a figure behind her, a face she recognized from the case files. Then everything went black. When Sarah awoke, she was strapped to a chair in another hidden room. Monitors surrounded her, each displaying bizarre, swirling patterns. A voice spoke from the shadows, calm and eerily familiar. "Detective Reeves, welcome to the next level of human evolution." The man who stepped into view was Dr. Alan Thorne, a brilliant neuroscientist who had vanished years ago after his research into mind control was deemed unethical. He explained his grand vision: a world where crime could be eliminated by reprogramming the human mind. The missing people were his test subjects, their disappearances staged to attract attention. As Thorne monologued, Sarah worked to free herself from her restraints. She kept him talking, learning the full scope of his plan. He had chosen this abandoned park as his base, using its isolation and built-in mazes to his advantage. The funhouse was rigged with hidden cameras and speakers, allowing him to monitor and manipulate his subjects. Sarah's fingers found the flash drive in her pocket. If she could just reach her phone, she could send the evidence to her partner. Thorne, lost in his own brilliance, didn't notice her subtle movements. He was too focused on preparing a syringe filled with a sickly green liquid, his latest mind-altering compound. Just as Thorne approached with the needle, Sarah made her move. She kicked out, knocking the syringe from his hand. In the ensuing struggle, she managed to activate her phone's emergency beacon. Help was on the way, but she still had to survive Thorne's wrath. The fight took them through the funhouse, a deadly game of cat and mouse. Sarah used her knowledge of the changing maze to her advantage, leading Thorne into dead ends and traps of his own making. But he knew this place better than anyone, and soon had her cornered. As Thorne closed in, Sarah found herself backed against a wall of mirrors. In a desperate move, she smashed one with her elbow. The shattering glass seemed to trigger something in the funhouse's ancient wiring. Sparks flew, and suddenly the whole structure was ablaze. Fire spread quickly through the dry, rotting wood. Sarah and Thorne's fight for dominance became a race for survival. Smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe or see. Sarah stumbled through the burning maze, determination overriding her fear. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Sarah burst through a hidden exit, gulping in fresh air. Behind her, the funhouse collapsed in a fiery inferno. Of Thorne, there was no sign. Sirens wailed in the distance as backup finally arrived. In the days that followed, the full story came to light. Thorne's victims were found, alive but deeply traumatized. The flash drive Sarah had secured provided a wealth of evidence, exposing not only Thorne's experiments, but also a network of wealthy backers who had funded his work. As she stood at the edge of the burned-out amusement park, Sarah knew this case would haunt her for years to come. The scars left by Thorne's twisted vision wouldn't heal easily, but she had stopped him, saved lives, and brought a measure of justice to those who had suffered. The abandoned park was cordoned off, set for demolition. But as Sarah turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something of Thorne's legacy remained, hidden in the ashes. A chill ran down her spine as a gust of wind carried the faint sound of carnival music. This case was closed, but Sarah knew in her gut that the real story was far from over. As Sarah drove home that night, the events at the amusement park played on repeat in her mind. The case was far from over. She knew Thorne's network of backers wouldn't simply disappear, and the victims would need extensive rehabilitation. Her job was only beginning. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the precinct early. She found her partner, Detective Mike Rawlins, already at his desk, poring over the data from a flash drive. Mike looked up, his face a mix of awe and concern. "Sarah, this stuff? It's unbelievable. Thorne wasn't just trying to control minds, he was trying to connect them." Sarah pulled up a chair, and Mike showed her what he'd discovered. Thorne's experiments went beyond simple mind control. He was attempting to create a hive mind, linking his subjects' consciousnesses through a combination of drugs and technology. The implications were staggering and terrifying. As they dug deeper into Thorne's files, a name kept appearing: Nexus Corporation. It was a tech giant known for its advancements in neural interface technology. On the surface, they developed medical devices to help paralyze patients. But Sarah and Mike now suspected a far more sinister purpose. Their investigation led them to Nexus's gleaming headquarters downtown. Under the guise of following up on a routine cybercrime report, Sarah managed to get a tour of the facility. As a PR representative showed her around, Sarah's trained eye caught glimpses of things that didn't add up: restricted areas, nervous employees, and tech that seemed far too advanced for its supposed purpose. Back at the precinct, Sarah and Mike compiled their evidence. They were building a solid case, but both knew they were treading in dangerous waters. Nexus had deep pockets and powerful friends. As they worked late into the night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her instincts proved correct. The next day, their captain called them into his office. His face was grim as he informed them that the Thorne case was being taken over by a federal task force. All their files were to be handed over immediately. Sarah protested, but the captain's hands were tied. Someone high up had pulled strings. Frustrated but not defeated, Sarah and Mike decided to continue their investigation off the books. They reached out to one of the rescued victims, a former software engineer named Lily Chen. Lily was still traumatized from her ordeal, but she agreed to meet them at a quiet coffee shop. Lily's story filled in crucial gaps. She had been recruited by Nexus for what she thought was a revolutionary medical trial. Instead, she found herself trapped in Thorne's twisted experiments. But more importantly, she had overheard conversations that suggested Thorne was just a small part of a much larger operation. Armed with this new information, Sarah and Mike staked out Nexus headquarters. For days, they watched employees come and go, noting patterns and anomalies. Their breakthrough came when they spotted a familiar face, Dr. Alan Thorne, very much alive, entering the building under heavy guard. Realizing the depth of the conspiracy they were facing, Sarah knew they needed help. She reached out to an old friend from her cybercrime days, a hacker known only as Ghost. With Ghost's help, they began to unravel Nexus's digital defenses, uncovering a web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and encrypted communications. As they pieced together the puzzle, a chilling picture emerged. Nexus wasn't just experimenting with mind control, they were developing it as a weapon. The amusement park had been just one of many test sites across the country. Their ultimate goal was to create a technology that could control the minds of entire populations. Sarah and Mike knew they had to act fast. With Ghost help, they planned to infiltrate Nexus's main server room and extract irrefutable evidence of their crimes. The night of the operation arrived, and Sarah found herself once again creeping through shadowy corridors, heart pounding. They made it to the server room, but as Mike began downloading files, alarms blared. They were trapped. Security forces converged on their location. In a desperate move, Sarah used Thorne's own techniques against their pursuers, activating a prototype neural disruptor they had discovered. The device worked, incapacitating the guards, but it also affected Mike. As he collapsed, Sarah realized with horror that he had been compromised, a sleeper agent programmed by Nexus. She had mere minutes to complete the download and escape before reinforcements arrived. With seconds to spare, Sarah secured the evidence and fled the building. She emerged into the night, the weight of the truth heavy on her shoulders. The conspiracy was vaster than she had ever imagined, reaching into the highest levels of government and business. As she sped away from Nexus headquarters, Sarah knew her life would never be the same. She was now a fugitive, hunted by the very institution she had sworn to protect. But she also possessed the key to unraveling one of the greatest threats humanity had ever faced. The road ahead would be dangerous, but Sarah was determined to see it through. She had entered this case as a detective, but she would finish it as something more, a guardian against those who would enslave the minds of millions. As the city lights faded behind her, Sarah steeled herself for the battles to come. The real war for the future of human consciousness was just beginning.